Welcome to the Plane Hoppers Guild.
Greetings, adventurers, explorers, treasure seekers, and sellswords. Welcome to the Plane Hoppers Guild. I'm Journeyman Eric.
And I am Dungeon Lord Jay.
And we're here to talk about D&D.
We are.
And I hope all of our listeners listened to our very special episode last week. This week, we're going back to the usual scheduled programming.
Yep, I'm very excited for the Sage Advice topic this week, but I do have a topic this week that I would like to discuss with you, Eric. It's more for DMs, not necessarily for players. It's a mechanic, sort of like the 5-room dungeon design.
Well, mechanics are always something I'm interested in learning about.
So today, I have brought to us skill challenges.
Ooh.
Before I get into that, in true Dungeon Master fashion, I'm going to set the scene. The evil necromancer lies slain in the center of his summoning chamber. Before the surviving, battered adventurers have a moment to celebrate, the floor begins to shudder. The walls and ceiling begin to crack and splinter. They are 3 levels beneath the ground in this dungeon, and they come to realize that this ancient tomb is going to collapse to avenge its fallen master. The heroes have minutes, maybe less, to flee this forsaken place before it becomes their tomb as well. So as a dungeon master, how do you resolve this? The answer is skill challenge.
Damn, you're good at setting these up. Fuck yeah.
So I stole that a little bit. This concept was introduced to me by one of my many DM heroes, but someone that I very much appreciate, who is Matt Colville. He is a YouTuber kind of. He owns MCDM company that they're making their own RPG right now. Whatever, don't worry about that. Matt Colville has this series on YouTube. It's called Running the Game. And for any new Dungeon Master, I highly, highly, highly recommend Matt Colville's videos. He doesn't talk about D&D in the way that, say, I am in this podcast, right? Where I'm like, here's a thing, I'm going to talk about it. He talks about like game theory, game design theory. It's like if you went to a class and took a class with a professor on D&D, and it's absolutely amazing, and I love him to death. But he introduced this concept to me in one of his videos, but it wasn't its origins. He didn't make this up. It was actually introduced into the game of D&D in 4th edition, but it had a lot of mixed reviews, along with just 4th edition in general having a lot of mixed reviews.
I'm surprised to hear it's as recent as 4th edition.
So a skill challenge is kind of like a D&D minigame. So it's like the difference between combat and role-playing or exploration, right? When you're in this role-play mode, you treat the game differently than when the words roll initiative are said, right? When you roll initiative, you're no longer thinking about role-play and the dynamics of the whole situation. You're thinking about, how can I kill this thing in front of me? I need to roll dice, get numbers, plus this, minus this, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Mechanics. So it is a mini game, a set of mechanics that can represent something. Skill challenge is a series of ability checks undertaken when all the PCs work together to achieve a specific goal. The point of a skill challenge is to accumulate a specific number of successes against a DC, or a difficulty challenge, before the player characters accumulate a number of failures. I'm going to elaborate a lot more on this later. I'm just giving you the overview for right now.
Mm-hmm.
But why do we need skill challenges? Why do they exist? Well, they exist for cinematic scenes instead of the tedium of initiative and combat, and my character moves 6 squares and then the bad guy moves 6 squares and then I move 6 squares and then the bad guy makes. That's boring. It makes it snappy, punchy, it's quick to implement, and it's also mechanical. So players love that. Like, players love to just be able to roll dice. So if any chance they get to just roll a bunch of dice is perfect for D&D. That's why we're here, to roll dice and tell stories. So it is a perfect tool to use as a dungeon master for 100 million different reasons.
Yes, streamlining can be a huge one. And honestly, I think it's, especially like you said, compared against, I don't know if tedium is the right word, but combat is very much a kind of a slow, methodical thing. And skill challenge is like, okay, you got to do something quick. You got to go. You got to think. You got to do something. And that can really liven up, an atmosphere. So I really enjoy that part.
So let's say you want to do a skill challenge, right? You want to, as a dungeon master, you want to run a skill challenge. The first thing that you need to do is determine the goal. So let's go back to our example when I set the scene earlier, right? The player characters are trying to escape a collapsing tomb. This is perfect. If it was in initiative, which is how the book tells you to resolve these kind of situations, you could just pull out the map. My character moves 6 squares on his turn. I end my turn. My character moves 6 squares on my turn. I end my turn. But that is boring and not fun. So D&D rules, if you opened up the book and looked at the 5e rules on chases, they're absolutely terrible. And they can definitely be replaced with a skill challenge, almost always. So a chase scene, like a rooftop chase scene where the bad guy's escaping, that is perfect for a skill challenge. But it's also can be used for accomplishing a difficult task, like moving something extremely heavy, solving a puzzle or intricate lock, closing a portal, or stopping a ritual. It can also be used for overland travel in an inhospitable environment, such as the Arctic, the desert, the jungle, but also just like any overland travel, now that I think about it. It can also be used for combat encounters if you want to just trivialize like if it's just like a bunch of goblins and your players are like level 20, like there's no reason for you to actually do a combat. Just make it a cool, fun skill challenge. They're not going to die from 6 goblins. Or you can also use it for NPC negotiation or roleplay. You can basically use it for anything. And it's really fun. And I cannot wait to tell you guys how to do it. My only tip is make sure that the goal is clear to the players, as well as what they stand to lose upon failure before you actually start the skill challenge. We'll talk more about that in a second. I have this laid out in a way that I deemed appropriate to convey what a skill challenge is. But just keep in mind, make sure the goal is clear why you're running a skill challenge to the players. Mm-hmm. Any questions so far?
So far, so good.
Now we're going to get into types of skill challenges. Now, really, the main one that I'm going to talk about is all skill challenges. It's like the classic one, but there is you can put variations on a skill challenge to make it different or unique or more challenging. But the traditional, the classic skill challenge, I call an ability challenge or the classic skill challenge. When running an ability challenge, the first thing you do is set a static DC or difficulty challenge. Just some rules of thumb. Usually 10 is for a very easy, 15 is for medium, and 20 is for hard, or anywhere in between. A basic rule of thumb when determining DC is DC should equal 10 plus the proficiency bonus of the party. So if they're all the same level, they have like a +2, let's say. The DC should be 10 plus 2, 12. But you can always go harder or easier depending on the situation. The next thing that you do is set the number of successes versus failures. A good rule of thumb for setting how many successes versus how many failures is consider how many players you have. A fairly difficult skill challenge has a number of successes equal to the number of players. For example, if you have 6 players, you have 6 successes, and I almost always go for 3 failures or half as many failures. So if it's 10, if you have 10 players in your party, Lord forbid, then maybe you do 5 failures. For this specific type of skill challenge, the player characters need to work together to achieve the goal. So each success and failure is accumulated for the party as a whole. This type of skill challenge works well for our escaping the tomb encounter, right? So let's set up a skill challenge real quick, right? So let's say my little tomb example from earlier. I set up the scene and I say, okay, what would you guys like to do? On each player's turn, they choose a skill on their sheet that fits the goal they are trying to accomplish. This is my favorite part. This is the best part about the whole skill challenge thing, in my opinion, is because it doesn't really matter what skill they choose. It's just a mini game where you roll against a DC. They could really use any skill. The fun part is they have to convince me that it is a applicable skill or it fits the situation. So it's only limited by the amount of creativity that a player has in that scenario.
Now, is it the rule that somebody can't try and reuse the same skill multiple times?
Okay, so for a classic ability skill challenge, all of the players are working together to get 6 successes versus 3 failures. In this version, I don't let each player use another skill that another player had used. So if one player character uses athletics, the next player character that on his turn cannot use athletics, or none of them can use athletics. And this continues in a pattern until the last guy, he's basically got to roll persuasion or something. You know, like we've already made it through all the good skills and you have to find something that might not work. But the players get to pick what order they go in. This isn't like a thing where you roll initiative. The characters decide what order they want to go in. And the first person that speaks up, hey, I want to go first, they get to go. And then the next person's like, hey, I have this good skill, I'm going to go next. For my tomb example, let's say that the paladin wants to use athletics. I don't really need to be sold on whether or not athletics will help the party escape a tomb. I get it. They could just say, I run really fast, or I carry someone. But they could also say, I lift a portion of wall that has collapsed, right? Like you can narrate a scene as a player. Be like, oh, can I set up a scenario where my athletics will be applicable? Because this is like a chase scene. This is imagine it like it's a movie, right? Like there's obstacles in the way. How do you overcome those obstacles? You get to come up with the obstacles and the solution to the obstacle.
Something more thematic.
Exactly. But on the other hand, if the druid wants to use nature, that might require a more creative explanation from the player. But it's not impossible, right? They could say, I try to sense where the breeze might be coming through the cracks in the walls and try to navigate the party towards the outside. That's a really good way to use nature in this situation. And I can definitely vibe with that. But if their answer is unsatisfactory to you, if they want to use persuasion to persuade the walls to not collapse on them, you are allowed to say no and have them choose a different skill or come up with a different explanation. As a DM, you should always exercise your right to say no, but don't overdo it. A healthy dose of no makes you feel judicial and unbiased. But another thing is that the players can help too. If somebody can't come up with a way that they want to use nature, have the other players can speak up and be like, hey, this is like a teamwork thing, right? So everyone gets to contribute to this escaping of the tomb. The real point is to get everyone to be creative and create scenarios in this cinematic scene. But once the players have gathered the sufficient number of successes, the skill challenges is over and the goal is completed. But if they fail, you can either punish them severely or have the consequences be minor. In the example of the tomb escape, for each failures the players accumulate, they could take some bludgeoning damage from like a ceiling collapsing. Or they could get disadvantage on their next roll. That's for each failure. There could be penalties for singular failures or not. You don't have to do that. It could be that the failures mean nothing until the entire total number of failures is reached when they become trapped in the tomb or even die.
Yeah. It's less of like you only get like one shot at things. Like there's a punishment for it, but it's not necessarily death immediately. Or I mean, it could be if you run it like
could
that,
be.
But
This is the awesome thing about skill challenges is you can literally like use them for anything, have any kind of punishment for it, have any kind of goal. Like it is just a system that is not in the core rules of the game that should be.
Absolutely. It really should be.
This type of skill challenge that I've discussed where the whole party works towards a number of successes versus a number of failures. They can't repeat the checks, and they succeed together, they fail together. This is the kind that I use the most. It is good for basically fucking everything, but I think it works the best for chase scenes and escapes like our tomb escape. But it could work for overland travel as well and combats. So the next kind of skill challenge, it's an every man for himself challenge. So this kind of skill challenge is identical to the classic ability challenge, but the PCs each accumulate successes and failures on their own. Let's say it's 3 successes before you get 3 failures. Each player individually has to roll 3 successes before they each get 3 failures, because it's every man for himself. They're no longer working as a team. Similar to the ability challenge, failures can have consequences for each one accumulated, or nothing happens until the total number is reached. This is usually used for like tests of endurance, or like solo missions or solo escapes or chases. Or like, for example, I had my players do a skill challenge like this when they were like diving into freezing cold water as a test of the Frost Maiden. And they were like swimming to the bottom to try to touch this thing, this sigil to pass the test or whatever. And it was like a mile deep. And these dudes were like suffocating and trying to swim through. And that's like, it was a skill challenge. If you accumulate failures, you get worse and worse off. And if you succeed, you succeed. But it was every man for himself. Nobody could really help the other guy.
Yeah, the player, whether a player does really well or really poorly, doesn't affect any others. You know,
Correct.
If somebody rolls really badly and dies, for example, well, the others can keep going as they were.
Yes, exactly. In this type of challenge, each player can use whatever skills they want. It still has to make sense, but they individually cannot use the same skill they have already used. But another player can use that same skill. So they could all roll athletics on the first round. That's fine, right? But the next time they roll, none of them can roll athletics. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I've also used this, and you've experienced it now, Eric. I've used this type of skill challenge for a escape scene in my convention one-shot.
I would say that was, no offense, but that was the highlight for me, was that final escape.
I agree.
Much fun.
I agree. It is the best part of the adventure. Well, why don't you give everybody a brief background on what happened?
Yeah, so this was a one-shot, kind of like a heist mixed with combat. And at the end, the big bad evil guy came back into his lair, saw all of us players, with what was a goldfish. And we had to sort of escape from this giant, angry beholder firing lasers and all that. So everyone was, doing skill challenges of, how do you run through this maze? How do you get past these obstacles? I think everybody but one person died.
Yep. I love that one. Well, because in this version of the game, the number of failures did not matter. It was only the number of successes that mattered. Because each time there was a failure, I rolled randomly to determine what eye ray they got hit by the beholder. So there was an automatic hit by the beholder of an eye ray. They just had to roll to save against it. So that was the penalty for failure. So it doesn't matter how many failures you get unless you die from a disintegration ray or a death ray or something. But yeah, that's a great example of an every man for himself challenge. They weren't working as a team to escape. They were working individually to escape from the beholder.
Mm-hmm.
The final kind of skill challenge that I wanted to discuss is a falling DC challenge. So I haven't used these that much, but I know about them. So this type of skill challenge can be used when PCs are accomplishing something that could possibly get easier with each success. So the DC starts very high, and with each accumulated success, the DC lowers by 2, thus making it easier for the next player to succeed against it. And players can use the same checks in succession or not. It's up to the DM. Everybody can use the same check if they want. It doesn't matter. If a player accumulates a success and then the next player fails, it can either raise the DC or not affect it. Matt Mercer is known for using a similar sort of system when using resurrection magic. Whenever a player character casts a resurrection spell or some revivify or something like that, he has them do a whole ritual where they have to call the soul back from the other side. And it could possibly fail, but the way that he sets it up is it's a very high DC to begin with. And if someone passes that, then it becomes easier for the next person to convince the soul. And then it becomes easier for the next person to convince the soul. the same system could be used also for lifting or moving something extremely heavy. So if someone's pulling on it and they succeed, that means that they are pulling their weight so that the next person has less they have to pull on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, very interesting. I wouldn't have thought to use it for revivification, but it's an interesting mechanic.
Yeah, that's how Matt Mercer handles it. It can also be used. Now, this is interesting. I've never used it this way, but it could be used for negotiation, like roleplay wise. If you're trying to convince the king to send his army to aid you in your quest, the first check is really high DC. But whatever they say can convince the king, hey, that's not a bad idea. And then the next check they make after that is a lower DC. And you turn this roleplay encounter, instead of everything hinging on one successful persuasion check, it's a back and forth, like real life. You know, you can convince someone of something, but it's a back and forth. They are staunch in their beliefs. You are staunch in your beliefs. You go back and forth. Eventually, someone might bend a little. And that's where that's how you can take a role play encounter, a negotiation, and turn it into a little fun little mechanic. And it doesn't have to be all cinematic and heavy duty like an escape scene. You could do it slowly. Like over the course of 2 hours of talking to this king or whatever, each time a player says something that's like, damn, that is a good point, be like, roll a persuasion check. Okay, that's another success. You know what I mean? And add up to that a number of successes or failures that you have behind the screen. All right. I'm going to run over very quickly everything that we've talked about so far and how to put it all into a skill challenge. We have the basics for what a skill challenge is and how to prep one. Now we need to talk about how to run one. So step one is to establish the minigame. Like when the words roll initiative are spoken, it gets the players in the mindset of the game and not so much like a role play character thing. Skill challenge is kind of like a quick time event in a video game that's like separate from the usual gameplay. So make sure that the players know that they're about to enter a skill challenge. Make sure that the players are clear on the goal, like what they're trying to accomplish, and announce the DC and the type of skill challenge or the number of successes versus failure. Like explain the whole thing to them every single time. I promise it doesn't take away from role play. It doesn't take people out of immersion. In fact, most of the time it like gets people heavily invested when you know what the DC is, when you know that you failed or you know that you succeed as soon as the dice hits the table. The next thing, turn order. As I said before, does not have to be an initiative. Have the players decide amongst themselves to who wants to start. Consider each character's check as a turn in a round, like initiative. And it starts over when every character has had a chance to go. But it starts from that original order, so we're not getting all confused and out of order. So the first person that goes is the first person that goes on the next round, quote unquote. The every man for himself challenge that I described before could benefit from being an initiative. The next step is actually running a skill challenge. So at the beginning of a player's turn, ask the player what they want to do or what skill they want to use. Make sure it hasn't been used already. If it's satisfactory, have them roll. Regardless of a success or failure, narrate it. Narrate how it works, how it doesn't work, the consequences. Get the players invested with your narration. Skill challenges can be incredibly fun for everyone at the table, and a key part of that is your narration of how the PCs succeed or fail. Because the players know how many successes and failures they have, because you told them at the top, it leads to a lot of tension and drama at the table amongst the players, not even the characters in the meta of the game, right? The players are all excited and it's like gambling. They're like rolling dice like, hey, we're gonna win, you know. Try to maintain that energy.
Absolutely.
The last step is the end. It continues over and over and over and over again until the number of successes or the failures have been met. That's a skill challenge. It's pretty straightforward. I have 2 tips that I want to give you, specifically to you, Eric, but also to anyone wanting to run a skill challenge. It is, and we talked about this the other day, Eric, actually, so I don't necessarily have to give you this advice, but it's a mistake that I've made before, and I will definitely make it again, but just as a piece of advice, it is very bad practice as a DM to hinge player characters, plots, and progression on dice rolls. Dice are fickle creatures, and sometimes it's just a bad dice day. In some cases, consider that the PCs might reach the goal regardless of the outcome of the skill challenge. But upon failure, the situation is more dire, or there are more meaningful consequences. You know, like maybe they get exhausted if they fail, or they take damage, or the bad guys have more reinforcements when they show up, whatever, right? This skill challenge doesn't necessarily have to oh, well, everybody died because they failed the skill challenge. That can sort of take away from the fun, and it's just bad practice as a DM to hinge everything on some dice. Make sure that it has consequences, because else why are we even rolling? But don't hinge everything on it.
An excellent tip for sure.
And one more tip: if a player character wants to use a spell or special ability, you can adjudicate that by, instead of saying, no, we're in a skill challenge, you can't use your special abilities because that doesn't work with my system, just offer advantage on a check. Or in some cases, an automatic success. Like if they cast fly or something, maybe give them advantage on their next check or whatever. Right? Like, don't say, no, I'm in a skill challenge. We're in a skill challenge. Don't cast a spell that breaks my encounter. Right? Just be like, okay, you get advantage on your next check or whatever. Because we are using this mechanic. But if you want to use your special thing and burn a resource for that, that could be an automatic success for you, or advantage on your next check. That is skill challenges.
All right. Excellent. This is something that's kind of drifted in my head a little bit. I'm really glad we got to talk about it in detail, though. This has definitely given me some ideas about, honestly, just how to maybe spice up some levels of a campaign where it's like, I don't want to bog them down with 2 hours of combat just to make it interesting, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, just throw a skill challenge in there.
Yeah.
And skill challenges are for all the things that you can't really adjudicate. Right? Like if combat is going to make it, if being in turn order and moving 6 squares to chase after a guy that's running through the alleys is going to make your game come to a screeching halt. Run a skill challenge. It'll speed up the game. Everyone will be really stoked for it.
I don't want to give too many spoilers, but where I see it really shining, I'm running a game of Curse of Strahd that Jay is part of, investigating Castle Ravenloft. I think that could be a very good place for this kind of thing.
Oh, very interesting. I'm excited to see the next time that you decide to put in a skill challenge. So, do you want to move on to Sage Advice?
Absolutely. Our Sage Advice is something I've also been really looking forward to, because I know this is one of your favorites.
It is.
So for this week, we have what your players affectionately call the J Screw, if I remember, the lose-lose scenario. So I guess we should start off. What do you, Dungeon Lord Jay, consider a lose-lose scenario?
This topic, before I get into it, is sort of an amorphous game theory. This is not hard, fast tips that I can give you. Like my skill challenges thing, you can bet on those. What I'm about to say about the lose-lose scenario, take it with a grain of salt. This is my opinions and my game theory, right? This is my class on the lose-lose scenario. So what was repeat the question, please? I'm sorry.
What do you personally consider to be a lose-lose scenario?
Okay. Well, to begin with, the definition of a lose-lose situation or a no-win scenario is where one person or a group has choices, but no choice leads to a net gain. So from the perspective of a dungeon master, it's a scenario or situation where there is no right choice. It's usually a moral or ethical dilemma, like the trolley problem. Are you familiar with the trolley problem?
Absolutely.
for anyone that's not, you're standing on the side of like a railroad track and there's a trolley coming. And you can flip the switch at the T to either have one person be run over by the trolley or have 5 people be run over with the trolley. Which way do you pull the lever? Or do you do nothing and one person dies, right? Or 5 people die, whichever. So those are choices, but all of them are just not great choices. It's an ethical, moral quandary. When I say the lose-lose scenario, I am not talking about an unwinnable combat. It's just 2 or more bad choices.
Right. It's as you said, a moral conundrum where it's not like a video game where you have, the correct choice and then the incorrect choice, these different branching paths. There is simply might not be a way for everyone to be happy.
Right.
So we know what a lose-lose scenario is. How can a lose-lose scenario be used most effectively in a campaign?
The lose-lose scenario, in my opinion, is a very satisfying encounter for the DM, as well as the players in the long run. It's satisfying for you as the DM because, but as for the players, they might fucking hate it, but in the long run, it will be worth it. They will, in retrospect, after it has passed, be like, man, that was crazy that happened. It's also satisfying for the players because it's a situation meant to not be solved with character sheets and dice rolls. It usually boils down to pure player agency and pure player choice.
I can definitely see it being sort of the stoking of a fire of a storyline kind of thing. Yes,
but it is extremely, extremely difficult to implement. I personally use a lose-lose scenario when it comes to creating memorable and hateable bad guys. But it can be used in countless situations, and I have a couple of examples. One that I like to use is, let's say the players just spent all of their resources, their spells, their hit points, whatever, to clear a dungeon and receive a MacGuffin. As soon as they exit the dungeon, an extremely powerful villain and his army of lackeys appear and demand the MacGuffin. In this example, the options are give up the MacGuffin to the villain, furthering their goals, and setting the PCs back. Or fighting against the bad guy and very probably losing, or they win, but with very severe casualties. Or they could try to escape, which could possibly just be as deadly as a straight fight, if not more deadly. Those are all bad decisions. They're all bad choices. The point is to pick the lesser of the evils. Another example could be when the PCs are very low level, like first, second level. The main villain of the campaign appears before the party and does some extremely evil shit, like kills some townsfolk or something. The party can attempt to stop the villain, but they will likely be all killed. Or they can stand by and watch the bad guy do something extremely evil and they can't do anything about it. It doesn't always have to be bad guys. Another scenario is that an NPC who has information that the party needs is a monster hunter. And he requests that the party kill a werewolf that's holed up in a nearby town. Upon investigation, they realize that the werewolf is an innocent man who was cursed and has never harmed anyone. He has carefully contained his affliction and is very close to discovering a cure for lycanthropy that could save countless others. What do? You need this information from this monster hunter. He says, kill the wolf. He doesn't care which way, anything you say. It's an evil werewolf. You gotta kill it. Doesn't matter if he's good or not. But this guy's innocent. It's a lose-lose scenario. And this is more of a moral, ethical question. But I could go on and on and on and on about different examples of moral quandaries.
Had no better way of getting a player invested than making them really, really think about a decision.
Yes. And again, it all boils down to pure, completely unfiltered player agency. And the really difficult ones to pull off are the ones with the villain, because PCs hate having their hands tied. No player character likes having their hands tied in situations. So it's hard to pull off. You have to know your party. You have to be confident in your decision. I'm even tempted to say that newer DMs should be wary or not do this. It is difficult to pull off with a main villain. You can do the sort of ethical, moral quandary ones, but this thing with the villain is tough. It's tough to pull off.
Absolutely. Because in my personal experience, you have to be ready for the players to do anything, including attacking the villain.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Leveled.
Yep, I told you. But hey, but you know what, Eric? You did play that off pretty well because we were super underleveled and we started fighting this big boss guy because he was being evil and we heard shit about him. He was talking shit about us, whatever. And he fucking kicked our ass. But it came to a point where he said, "This is beneath me," and walked away. Right? And that made us absolutely fucking hate this guy. We were like, we got to kill this guy, even if he has never done a bad thing in his life. He needs to die. So it is good to create memorable villains.
Absolutely. But for any DMs out there, you do need to consider all the possibilities, no matter how remote or seemingly insane they would be to take.
Yep. We'll talk about that more in a minute. What's your next question for me, Eric?
Actually, this flows in very well. Like you said, how difficult these are to implement. How can you keep a lose-lose scenario from not feeling cheap or forced?
Okay. This is the one that I wanted to talk about the most. So this type of scenario really walks the line between railroading and player agency. On one hand, as I said before, it boils down to pure player agency. The outcome is almost entirely determined by the choices that the players make. On the other hand, it forces the PCs to choose something that they may not want to do, likely the solution that you want them to do. And having one choice is exactly the same as having no choice. In Lord of the Rings, Elrond says,
"You have only one choice. The ring must be destroyed."
But what he means is, you have no choice. The ring must be destroyed. It's an incredibly tricky subject. And I don't, like I said, I don't suggest, like, unless you're very confident in your abilities, I don't suggest just whipping one out willy-nilly. But I can give you some tips, the best that I can. A couple of tips that I have is have there be more than one choice. I think that's the most important thing between the difference between a railroad and a sandbox, right? It's a lose-lose scenario, not a lose scenario.
Mm-hmm.
The point is that you give the players choices. They can decide how they want to go out.
And in a way, not every loss is the same kind of loss, you know? It's not just success or failure. There may be other consequences for taking one or the other, even if both are bad.
That's a very good point. Another tip that I have is make it narratively satisfying. If you do it to set up a bad guy, make that bad guy or the decision that the PCs made actually mean something in the grand scheme of the campaign or have consequences. But also make it have a reward that come with it, like finally defeating the villain. Like I was just talking about this bad guy that we fought in your game, Eric. We hated him, but we got to kill him in the end.
Mm-hmm.
So it made us feel good about it because in retrospect, we felt a little fucked over in that situation, but we got to murderlate his ass, you know, so it was fine in the end. Another tip, and Eric, I want you to take this one to your grave, buddy. This is a very good tip. Never, ever expect the player characters to surrender. They will not.
Oh, yes.
They will not surrender. We play this game as players, as people, human beings on this earth, to feel like epic heroes who overcome overwhelming odds, not to surrender to the bad guys. If there's an overwhelming odds, we want to challenge it. We want to take the chance. So don't ever expect, and I've made this mistake before and it haunts me to this day. Don't ever expect them to surrender. Ever. It's a bad idea. Find a different way. Another tip, have alternate solutions after the outcome of the lose-lose. Let's say, in my example earlier, the villain that takes the MacGuffin, have the PCs discover another MacGuffin that only they know about. Right? So that gives them a sort of, they're set back, but they have a leg up on the bad guy. Maybe they know where something is that he doesn't know about. The lose-lose scenario should not just be a fuck you to the players.
Absolutely.
It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for tension, drama, player agency, and more adventure. It should lead to more adventure. It shouldn't just be like, fuck you, I win. That's not the point. The point is to put them in a situation where they want to complete the main goal of the campaign. Like they want to do the quest now.
Next question, actually. This does lead into the not cheap or forced feeling. How often should they be used? Should you only do it one time per evil character or one time per campaign?
So I suggest to use it sparingly. Players will not like being fucked like this. They won't like it.
Yes.
So, for example, if you play a video game and you keep losing over and over and over and over, eventually you don't want to play anymore. And the same goes for D&D. It can potentially put players off if used too frequently.
I absolutely agree. It's kind of like in a video game where they lead you into like a boss combat, but it's always scripted for you to lose. It just feels cheap if it happens more than once. It's like, okay, you're not really letting me try and solve things. You've already decided what's going to happen. So
right,
I
and
agree.
that is railroading.
This is a good one. At least I think so. This might kind of defeat the purpose of it, but should lose-lose scenarios always be unrecoverable, even if the players start trying to get really creative and off the book?
So this is an interesting question. So by design, the lose-lose scenario is supposed to be just that, lose-lose. But half of the fun as a DM, and I'm sure you can attest to this, Eric, is being surprised by your players' actions. If they somehow manage to come up with a creative alternative choice that you had not accounted for, let them do it. That is so important and a very common mistake in D&D in general, not just in regards to a lose-lose scenario. Eric, do you know what the difference between a railroad and a sandbox is?
Yes, absolutely.
For those that don't, a railroad is when you, as a DM, have a plan in mind and you don't allow players to make choices or decisions that stray from your plan. Not like a plan like for the adventure. Like every DM has a plan for a session. And if you aren't prepared for what the PCs want to do, it's okay to be like, hey, I don't have that part of the adventure prepared. This is what I have. Can we work with this? We're only human. We're not gods. We're not omnipotent. That is okay. And that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about, a railroad, is when the DM has an idea on the way certain scenes and encounters are going to go and doesn't allow players to make choices in those scenarios. That's railroading, and it's bad. We do not like that. But a sandbox, which always gets confused with an open world, and that's because they usually go hand in hand, but the definition of a sandbox, as I understand it, is the boundaries of what is possible is set in place. And the players are given free range to use whatever resources and creative ideas they have to overcome the challenges within those boundaries. So it's a sandbox, right? It's not an open world, it's a sandbox.
Exactly. A sandbox isn't the complete absence of structure. It's more of an unorganized, you can do anything you want within the boundaries of the sandbox. And you may be given toys to use in the sandbox, but you can't make up your own, really.
Yes, always. And I mean always allow room for player agency. Always. So if your players do come up with some creative solution, do it.
I agree 100%, because nothing is worse than thinking up a really cool idea that would work and the DM just says no because they didn't think about it. So now that we have an idea of what a lose-lose scenario is, what are some notable examples in popular media?
Okay, so I got a couple of good ones. The first one is in the beginning of the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Right? You're familiar with Indiana Jones, Eric?
Where he gets the little idol thing.
Yes, he escapes all the traps in the tomb. He's like about to die. He's finally got the idol, and when he finally emerges, there's a bunch of natives pointing spears at him or bows at him, and his rival Belloc takes the idol from him. That's a lose-lose scenario.
Ooh. And like you said, establishing a villain perfectly right there.
Yes, absolutely. But the iconic, the best one, the Kobayashi Maru from Star Trek. Are you familiar?
No, I am not.
Oh my God. So it is a training program that the Starfleet people have to go through, like the commanders and captains and stuff. And it is a no-win scenario. The scenario is there's a fuel ship. It's called the Kobayashi Maru. Is stranded in enemy space. And the choice must be made to either face an insurmountable enemy force or leave them to die. Well, it's like you can negotiate a treaty with them. It's more complicated than that. But boiled down, it's basically like you either fight to the death or you leave this stranded ship to die. It's the Kobayashi Maru. And it's well known that Captain Kirk reprogrammed the training so that he could win, because in his words,
I don't believe in the no-win scenario.
Another good example is from there's two from the Dark Knight, the Batman film. When the Joker rigs the two ferry boats, leaving the city with explosives, and then gives the passengers on each boat the trigger for the other. One boat is full of civilians and the other boat is full of prisoners. What do they do, right? Like that's a sort of moral quandary, a lose-lose scenario. But the one that's more relevant is from Dark Knight, is when Rachel, like Batman's girlfriend or whatever, and Harvey Dent, the Joker rigs them with explosives and then leaves Batman only enough time to save one or the other. So Batman has to choose who to save. That is definitely that is a perfect lose-lose scenario. It's perfectly set up, and it's the consequences for it are just as dire. I definitely think that is like a golden standard for a lose-lose scenario.
Oh yeah, harsh but not unsatisfying.
Yeah, it means a lot for the character.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well those are the examples I came up with.
Excellent. Yeah, it's like you said, very tricky to implement, but I think this is a topic that, especially for DMs that want to maybe get a little more cinematic with things, this is a very awesome thing to really dig into.
It's a good source of tension and drama for sure. But I don't suggest using it a lot. Seriously, use it sparingly. Yeah,
very sparingly.
Yes, I agree. All right. Well, that was the lose-lose scenario, the Kobayashi Maru. Would you like to move on to the bit?
Absolutely. Here's hoping I actually did the bit right.
I'm so excited.
So for this week, we have our, what do we call it? We call this Schooled. Going to be asking you some questions about some spells and their very strangely assigned schools of magic.
Okay, I'm ready.
So I'm going to give you the name of a spell and a description of what it does. And I would like for you to guess what school of magic this should be classified under.
Okay.
So for the first one, we're going to have Leoman's Tiny Hut. A 10-foot radius immobile dome of force springs into existence around and above you and remains stationary for the duration. The spell ends if you leave the area.
So I have two for it. All right, this is my answer is evocation, but my second answer is conjuration.
The correct answer is, it is evocation.
Okay, all right.
I think you hit it. I think it should be more conjuration.
For sure.
You are conjuring this immovable dome.
Yes. I evocation has some weird ones. So I've been studying up on my schools of magic. That's where the inspiration behind this came from, because I've been doing Netherese Fallen City, where each school of magic has a tower. So I've been reading up. So I might do pretty good at this one.
Ooh, then you might get this one. So the next one, we have Spare the Dying. You touch a living creature that has 0 hit points. The creature becomes stable.
I bet it's necromancy.
It is necromancy. So I said, cure wounds is evocation. That's healing. I think this should be a healing spell. You are healing a creature into becoming stable, aren't you? You're not bringing it back to life.
You're right, but I will add that Gentle Repose, which is like a first level spell, keeps corpses from rotting more, and that's a necromancy spell. That was my basis for this one, is that I bet it was necromancy because Gentle Repose is necromancy.
I can see the logic in that. I still think technically it's anyway.
Yes. No, Eric, listen, I get it.
It's on the topic of healing, we have Lesser Restoration. You touch a creature and end either one disease or one condition affecting it. The condition can be blinded, deafened, paralyzed, or poisoned.
Transmutation.
I'm sorry, Abjuration.
Abjuration.
Yeah.
Oh,
Abjuration.
yeah. I
Why?
can see it. I can see it, I guess. Oh, that's strange. It's an abjuration spell?
It's Abjuration. Cure wounds is evocation, but Abjuration?
Yeah, that's pretty strange. Same school as Shield? Like, what?
Yeah, same school as Shield.
That's weird. All right. I didn't get that one.
Next one. Create or destroy water. You will either create or destroy water.
That's conjuration.
This is transmutation.
What? What?
I know. You know what
That is so
conjuration?
weird.
Watery sphere is conjuration. But create or destroy water? Transmutation.
That is so weird. That is so weird. Okay.
Next up, Cloud Kill. A 20-foot radius sphere of poisonous yellow-green fog centered on a point you choose within range. The fog spreads around corners. It lasts for the duration or until strong wind disperses it, ending the spell. The area is heavily obscured. Takes poison damage.
Okay. So I'm going to walk you through my rationale here. I'm going to say necromancy because necromancy has a lot of poison stuff. What my gut is telling me evocation, but I'm going to say necromancy.
I have it in my notes that this spell should either be necromancy or evocation. It is conjuration.
Oh my god, I almost said that too. Oh my god. This is a fucking travesty. Notes. Oh my god.
Or like Cone of Cold is evocation.
Right. Oh my god. Oh well, I guess it stays. That's why. Because it stays. Because it's not like a kabam, like a fireball or a lightning bolt. It stays. So it's a conjuration spell. That makes sense.
Okay.
The transmutation on the water thing is fucked up though.
Yeah. Last one that I have. Simulacrum. You create a duplicate of one beast or humanoid that is within range for the entire casting time of the spell. The duplicate is a creature, partly real and formed from ice or snow, and it can take actions and otherwise be affected as a normal creature.
So, Eric, you don't know this because it was before your time with me, but I know without a shadow of a doubt what the answer is. Because my party has encountered a simulacrum before in a crashed illusion tower. It is an illusion spell.
That one.
Yep, I put that one when I did Schooled on the Grumpy Dungeon Master podcast. That's the one I did too, simulacrum, because it feels like it is not an illusion spell.
No, it feels like Create Magen is transmutation.
Right.
Like this feels like you're creating a creature. It feels like. I mean, I'm not going to say illusion is completely out of left field. It just doesn't feel like the first choice. But no, that was our Schooled. You did very well.
Much better
than I would have done.
Thank you. I know my schools of magic, although I would have flunked wizard school for sure. Bad at tests.
You and me both.
All right. Well, that was the podcast.
Yep,
We
we
did
had
it.
some fantastic tips. Absolutely awesome. I'm really glad we got to talk about these because I've been kind of had them in the back of my head as I was working on this Curse of Strahd.
Well, I'm glad to help. So we're going to end this podcast the way we end all the podcasts with a tip from the Plane Hoppers Guild Handbook. Plane Hoppers Guild Handbook tip number 324. Just because the rogue didn't find a trap doesn't mean there isn't a trap. That's it. Safe travels, adventurers.
Happy roads, adventurers.
Thank you for joining the Plane Hoppers Guild.